Mike Naig grew up on his family's Century Farm in Cylinder, Iowa. It's a community of fewer than 100 people in the northwest part of the state, and what he hears from that farm keeps him connected. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Naig still makes it back to help his dad on the farm, but most of the time, other than when he's helping his wife raise their 3 boys, he serves as Iowa's Secretary of Agriculture. You might remember Naig joined us here on the podcast last year to talk about some of the challenges that he was seeing. Well, some of those challenges remain, but others have emerged. So we'll begin our conversation with what he's seeing now. Can we start as we begin 2025? How do you look at the overall health of the industry you serve?
Yeah, we knew that all throughout 24, and we'd been expecting it. The forecasting had been for a softening of the ag economy, a reduction in on-farm income, and certainly that did play out. As I would visit with folks as you closed out the year, we saw a bit of a jump, a bit of an uptick in some prices. Pork industry looked a little better. Beef industry obviously continues to be very strong, and yet folks kind of say, well, what dynamic changes throughout 2025, and barring some. Well, you could have some tariff activity. You could certainly have some weather activity, but it just kind of seems like we might be stuck a little bit here in where we are. The dynamic in terms of we had a very large crop. We're sitting on a significant carryout. The questions that have been kind of plaguing us remain in terms of inflation, high input costs. Frankly, just where are you going with all of this product? Corn and soybean. And so, I think folks kind of feel like we're plateauing a little bit here, and there's got to be something that changes that dynamic here in 25. So definitely under pressure. Maybe the difference is that as we worked through 2024, folks were more mindful of it, maybe in terms of what was happening with revenue, making some adjustments, working with lenders on a more proactive basis, maybe slowing down some of those purchases that were unnecessary or could be pushed off. And obviously, Dave, then that resulted in what you saw as in terms of the impact on the rest of the supply chain, large manufacturers of equipment and others, layoffs and talking about their economic concerns. And so it's clearly now spreading throughout the food and ag supply chain. And, again, that profitability at the farm gate is really the driver of it all.
You put off those big purchases, but you can only do that for so long, right?
I talk to a lot of folks in the equipment business that'll say, we've gone from the last couple of years being order takers, when do you want it? Here's what it costs. This is when we can get it for you. This is what we've got, to needing to sell. And it still makes sense to buy certain things because you got to operate efficiently. You got to look at workforce and all, how do we accommodate for those types of things? And flat out, I just got to get over a certain number of acres. And so you got to go back to actually selling things, and it's got to make sense from an economic standpoint. Though I hear people say things like in the lending side of just keeping your payments the same doesn't mean that you've actually doing what you need to do. That payment actually may be high, even if it is the same as what the last piece of equipment was. So I do believe, as I visit with lenders, that there's more awareness about that certainly right now than there maybe was a year ago.
How much do you get back to the farm?
I'm there a lot during the spring and the fall, and Dad and I are talking a regular basis. I'll need to haul some grain here after the first of the year, so I kind of bounce back and forth throughout the rest of the year. But spring and fall are busy times. Of course, it's a blessing and a curse. The fact that I've got phones and connectivity, I can do a lot of business right from the cab of a tractor. I'm thankful for that, but I do have the great ability to get up there and still be very connected to what I'm doing here at the department.
Can you talk a little bit about it? How long has it been in the family?
Well, it's the home farm is a Century Farm. I'm fourth generation, raising the fifth generation. My father has been farming by himself. My grandfather unfortunately passed away when Dad was young, and so my dad and his brother have been farming now for over 50 years. A lot of people talk about those 40 chances type concepts. I get 40 crops. Dad and my uncle are working on over 50, and am so blessed that I've got that. He didn't get a chance to farm with his dad. I get a chance to do that. And of course, there's anybody that's in a generational business or has family business. Boy, there are things that you think about differently, and you just laugh sometimes. Go, is this because we're a little different age, or is this because of something that you learned? And what's this? Why are you thinking this particular thing? Well, of course, it's always got a background, something that happened years ago, and I get to benefit from that. So I don't know what I bring to it from his perspective. You'd have to ask him that.
But that's what makes it interesting to talk to you all the time is that so you're in elected office, but you still have your foot on the
Yeah.
farm and the pressures, I mean, the love for it, the pressures for it, all those things you feel, right? I mean, it's been around for a century, so you don't want to screw it up.
It's true, and I look, I consider myself to be I think I'm like a lot of people that grew up in my era. So I'm 46 years old. My siblings and I grew up on a farm during the 1980s farm crisis with
Hmm.
parents who said you're going to do anything but farm,
Hmm.
because they were worried about that future and were we going to be able to care for families. And so I from an early age knew that I was likely going to have to do something else. But I got lucky though, because I've got a passion for ag and a passion for policy and even politics, yes. And trying to put my skill set to best use means that I've been able to have a career, always have a career off the farm that was related to these things I really cared passionately about, have a foot on that farm. The ability to be connected to that is so important. And then now to be in elected office as well, I just think brings all those pieces together. I count myself really fortunate, but I think it definitely helps me in my role to be able to have that grounding. And as I always say, I've got a couple of farmers that have very easy access to me that don't mind telling me exactly what they think about, or the job that I'm doing or should be doing, or I can always get a very easy sounding board from a lot of folks, including family.
Your job as Secretary of Agriculture makes you privy to a lot of information. Does that make you more or less optimistic
Oh.
about the vitality of your family farm?
Very much. Look, it is the greatest part of this job is the fact that I get to see across the entire spectrum, and not just in Iowa, but I get to see and compare us to around, other places in the United States, but around the world. And Dave, I wouldn't trade what we have here truly for anywhere else in the world related to our ability, our productivity, our history, the heritage, the culture, all of those things, but just the generations of work. I mean, I get a chance a lot of times I host visitors, delegations from around the world here, and they'll sometimes just kick back and say, how did you all do this? Like it was one thing, right? And
Hmm.
you get a chance to kind of tell that story of, yes, it starts with the land, right? If we didn't have the productive land that we have and the weather that we have, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it's not just that. There are other places in the world that have productive land and cooperative weather for the
Hmm.
most part. What makes us special? Well, it's concepts of ownership. It's freedom to operate. It is access to a marketplace. It's access to capital and innovation, right? We are always looking for the next greatest thing. I want the latest technology. I want the newest hybrid or variety. I want it's wired into us to be thinking that way. But as it turns out, farmers all over not every farmer in the world has those pieces. And that has been, that has come through hard work of many who have gone before us that allows us to be where we are. So you talk about that weight of responsibility. I mean, I think every generation has a tremendous responsibility to respect what's been done, carry forward, and make sure that you're positioning others for success. I'm more optimistic uh, today than ever that we have a bright future. It won't look the same. It never does. But that's the art of this. That's the challenge of all this. Is about the time you get it figured out, something changes, and you've got to accommodate for it.
Okay, so I mentioned you get all kinds of information. How do you balance, so when you're hearing from and when you know firsthand the pressures that producers feel to keep getting better, increase that yield, whatever their specialty is, but to produce more of whatever it is. And
Hmm.
then you also then hear complaints about, we're not doing enough to protect
Yeah.
the water, we're not doing enough to protect the land. How do we make sure we're not just stripping the hell out of the land and ruining it for your kids and grandkids and such? So as you sit in your office, how do you look at that balance?
Yeah, well, right, and it's a responsibility, I think, frankly, for the Iowa Secretary of Agriculture to bridge some of those gaps or bridge some of those divides. And so much of this is, you think of it, it's almost like we have to sometimes translate our own language or things that we know just intuitively because we grew up a certain way, or you know it. But how do you get that message out? And by the way, a consumer's opinion about where their food comes from is valid, right? They get to have
Mhm.
an opinion about something that's incredibly important to them. They likely don't have the time or the opportunity to necessarily know about that. And so, boy, there's the challenge, right? More and more Americans every year are further and further away from the actual farming activity. And so it becomes incumbent on all of us to try to bridge those gaps. And so I don't mind telling you that it can be a source of frustration, right? To say, how is it that, well, by the way, the other thing you have to think about is sometimes in ag, we will talk about we are more productive than ever. And that may sound like to somebody that you're more productive than ever, but you're doing it at the cost of the environment, or you're doing
Mhm.
it in a way that's inappropriate. And so you have to be careful that you aren't out there touting something and it actually is working against you, maybe. And so you have to understand those things. And you have to put yourself in places where you can hear that kind of feedback, and work hard to understand what our consumers and the general public, what are the questions that they have. And the cautionary note that I give to the ag side is, and don't come out of the chute saying, well, Dave, you need to be educated on this
Hmm.
topic. None of us want to have a finger pointed in our face and say, you're not very smart, you need to be educated. Right, it don't feel good.
Yeah.
How do you engage in a constructive way that says, what are your questions really? And would you give us a chance, to share what actually happens? And maybe the final piece on this is, we're really comfortable talking about production, and we love numbers, and the science tells us this, but you better have a story, a compelling story, and to be able to connect with people in a real way. And we need to not only be really good about talking and thinking about what happens on farms in the production side of things, we've got to continue that all the way down the chain to that ultimate end customer, end user, and be thinking about how to do those things. By the way, people talked about this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They'll talk about it 10,
Sure.
20, 30 years on, but it remains one of those challenges. And I need to play a role in that. And I think we do that, but we're always looking for the next thing that we can do to try to move the needle.
Okay, speaking of challenges, what is it like for you to get the alert, we've got another bird flu case?
Mm.
What is that like? How does your department spring into action when that happens?
Yeah. Well, look, I'll say this tongue in cheek. I wish we weren't good at it. Meaning that we do have experience here now, and it goes back to high path avian influenza. And so remember, high path is a foreign animal disease, and foreign animal diseases are unique. There's African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, high path avian influenza. Those are significant diseases that have global implications. And what that requires is, and they have trade implications, and we give as good as we get here. If a country has high path or African swine fever, we don't want it here. And so we create trade barriers, stop
Hmm.
movement of animals or plants or whatever would be carrying that sort of thing. Just like our trading partners will stop movements from the US if we have it. And so you have to take these things very seriously. And there's a regulatory component to it, because what you're trying to do is ensure that trade can continue. And so there are well-established plans and protocols and requirements that we have agreed to as a country, and that we expect others to adhere to as well. So you have to know those things. You better be ready to adhere to that. Here was something that I was the deputy secretary at the time, but after 2015, which was a very massive outbreak of high path avian influenza, half the cases in the country were in the state of Iowa. It was bad. We learned a lot. and we should have learned a lot. And we're significantly better. The industry's better. Producers have better biosecurity. The department's better prepared to respond. And it's night and day, frankly, 2015 to when this reoccurrence has been. But for the next couple of years after 2015, we would have trading partners that would come to Iowa and sit down in our conference room, and we would meet with them for a day, explaining to them our response, how they can be assured that our products are safe. And that was a learning for me that, oh, this really does have a long tail on it. The things you do right on the front end save you months on the back end, perhaps in trade implications. So, I would say we're ready for that call when it comes, because we've got a great team here, the animal industries, the state veterinarian, the team. We exercise, we practice. Frankly, we just live in a kind of a state of anticipation. And unfortunately for all of us, and us being the industry as well, is that we've had high path in poultry and last year in dairy as well for the last spring and fall for the last 3 years. So we live in a really state of readiness, frankly, at all times.
So what goes through your head when you heard that Louisiana case where we had a human death?
Yeah, well, it's sad news, of course. I mean, any time tragic for the family. Important to have the facts here, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
that. And we actually have, for the first time, just a few weeks ago, we had the first human case detected in the state of Iowa.
Mhm.
Um, for the most part, I think with very few exceptions, and they're really investigating maybe those a couple of exceptions to figure this out, but that the cases, and I think there's 60 plus cases of human cases in the country. By and large, those have occurred with people that were working on a farm that had high path, either in the dairy herd or in poultry. And so that's pretty logical. What we have not seen is human to human spread. If you see human to human transmissions, that's a different story. Right now, it's pretty logical and it's explainable that you've got these connections to these farms. But every time you have whether it was the poultry issue that then spilled over into dairy, or the human cases, or frankly, some of the cases that have been happening with people's pets, or cats, or wild birds, every one of those things just is another step, and it makes people think about it, more
Yeah.
awareness and concern about it. And it also drives home the idea that this is why we need to try to contain it and really work hard to stamp this virus out on farms and keep it an animal health issue and not a human health issue.
And can you explain to people? I mean, it's really, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the wild birds that are likely introducing these,
Yeah.
right? And that's so, how the heck are you going to stop a bird from, landing on your property?
That's tough. It is, and it's proven. So the nice part about the way that the tracing works is that you can actually go in. If we have a positive case on a poultry farm, you can go in and isolate that virus, and you can track, and you can know which variant it is, and you can start to see pieces. If it's likely spread from one farm to the other, you can generally connect those dots. What we see here in the state of Iowa, and have for now the last 3 years, is that these have been wild bird introductions. Back in 2015, it spread farm to farm, which told us we had biosecurity issues that people weren't really thinking about. Since 2015, lessons learned have really prevented that. That has come at great expense and great work
Sure.
by our farmers, by the way. But you just nailed it. How do you stop the fact that you've got migratory birds that are flying through in the spring and the fall? And you've got to keep them off of your property and out of your buildings, and ventilation systems can pull some of that in. That's tough. And frankly, what evidence would tell you is we have not figured that out yet. Industry or us or working together, there are questions that need to be answered about biosecurity. How do you create strategies to prevent these types of infections? And I know people are moving heaven and earth trying to figure that out. Even how might you redesign buildings or properties
Hmm.
or your business in order to accommodate for that? So unfortunately, the questions remain about that.
So is the most realistically that we're just going to have to deal with this for a while until
Well,
those best practices can be perfected?
I think what we've learned now is that this is always a threat. And by the way, this is not just happening in Iowa, it's happening
Sure.
all across the country, and it's happening in countries all around the world. And so, what used to be, you can kind of watch these things kind of develop through the flyways. And if Asia's dealing with it, well, you can kind of, maybe if it's next year, maybe the fall or the spring. we may end up with that coming through our flyway. And so you're trying to learn about all those things. But I was in the UK last year and met with some of their animal health leadership, and it was just like sitting in a meeting here, right? I mean, many countries are trying to think about these things. So I think it's an ever-present threat. Frankly, disease in animal production it's just that these are unique, that they're foreign animal diseases. Um, uh, and so we'll have to deal with that. But I'm not in the camp that says, well, we're going to have this every year from now on.
Okay.
But we've got to be thinking about how do we get ahead of this. And of course, vaccination is a tool that we should be thinking about. It's not easy, and there are trade implications. So it's not a silver bullet by any means. But I think that we should be pursuing that innovation to at least see if it can be a tool.
Okay, so that might involve federal government, perhaps. Let's just dip our toe into politics a little bit. I'm curious, what is your job like? Because you are an exception, in that you understand ag because that's in your family lineage for generations. But you're in politics, you got to run under a party label to get in the position where you are. But most people you meet are not going to have that kind of background, right? I mean, Iowa has Chuck Grassley, but there aren't a lot of Chuck Grassleys. In many ways, there aren't a lot of Chuck Grassleys. But as we kind of look nationally, so what do you feel? You do a little bit of traveling. What do you feel your role is to make sure that elected officials who don't have any direct ag connections get it? We're
Yeah.
about to have another new presidential administration. It's kind of return of an old one, I suppose, but
Yep.
it's a new makeup. So how do you make sure that these folks understand that the ag world is represented?
Well, look, I would say this at the outset of Trump 2.0 coming in, right? I would say this at the beginning of any administration. You've got a ramp up time. There's a steep learning curve for people that are coming into new roles. And certainly we have a job to every one of us, and my colleagues across the country do the same. Every grower group, association has to do this, and everybody needs to be gearing up, getting ready to explain, to advocate for. I mean, this is why it's important to have associations and to be involved in grassroots policy development. This is where I have a job to do. People should expect that I'm able to have relationships with policymakers in Washington, D.C., the entities that we co-regulate with, EPA, FDA, USDA, our partners. It's incumbent on us to develop and maintain those relationships so that we can have these kinds of conversations. And I sit in kind of a unique role, right? So I am both now an advocate for Iowa to a federal government, a federal administration, but I'm also I receive information. I don't know everything about every detail, every subject, state of Iowa. I have to be receptive to that. So I would say I can understand that, where you have to both be open to that. I have to exercise that in my role, to meet with people, to listen to them, to learn, to go, to work hard, to consult with experts on things that are important, and I better figure out what's going on. Well, I expect those same things of our leaders that are in the federal government as well. They'd better be willing to listen and engage, and then we'd better be there with the information that they need. So, I mean, this is how this works. People just need to gear up for that and be ready to go. And I think we will successfully accomplish that again. The other thing that we love to do, you mentioned Senator Grassley, and I think he's been great at doing this throughout the years, but come out to Iowa, come see us. I love being able to I can remember bringing Sonny Perdue out to Iowa, or he came to visit, and we were able to put together a nice program for him, get him around to some folks. Uh, you know, we can put people in front of farmers. We can put you in front of businesses. We can put you in front of community leaders. We can take you to one of the great land grant institutions in the state of Iowa. You can see where research is getting done. You can do that in a day in Iowa. And so we always love to be able to get people here. And I think that's, we'll continue that with this new administration, and frankly, the new Congress. Is come see us, ask any question you want, stand on a farm, look a farmer in the eye, jump in a tractor, go for a ride, and see what we're actually doing out here. I think I'm a big believer in that. Try to go or get them here, and we'll be certainly doing that.
Okay, let's end with this. We'll put you on the spot to end this conversation.
Oh, you always do something to
I know,
put somebody on the spot.
that's the fun part of this. Give us something in the state of Iowa that is maybe an emerging crop, an emerging technique, a trend, something that maybe has not gone mainstream for attention, but you're privy to all kinds of information. So what are you seeing that kind of gets your fascination right now?
Now I'm like thinking of, I got like 4 things that I
All
can
right.
think of. I would say, look, on the, I think cover crops continues to grow, and trying to figure out how to monetize those, whether it be small grains, et cetera. I think there's some really cool things happening there from a feed standpoint, maybe even brewing and distilling, some good things happening there. The use of biologicals in terms of crop production, whether for nutrients or for crop protection techniques. I think this will be something that we're on the front end of today. Fast forward even 10 years, and I believe that'll be very, very prevalent on farms. Some challenges there. Challenges. I don't know. The trick there is going to be, how do you sort through what's it worth to me? How much am I willing to pay? How do I track that? Those are open questions, and certainly we'll have to think about those. And then I would think maybe the thing that's not quite mainstream yet, but coming, would be just again around precision and drones and UAVs, that type of thing. So there's 3 things, Dave. I cheated, didn't tell you one, but I mean, those are all really, I think, exciting things that we won't have to go that many years down the road, and they'll be very, very prevalent.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate the time. Thank you.
Always great to visit.
You can learn more about Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig in our profile piece about him. You'll find that in the weekly American Farmland Owner newsletter. Just go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. You can sign up while you're there. Just put in your email address, and you can get the newsletter sent to your inbox every week for free. It's the place where landowners get their news. Thanks for checking it out. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. And thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.